Over the decades, there have been a great many movies that have been created that have been considered to be bold, daring, and incredibly innovative. Some of these projects have walked a fine line of subjects and topics that may consider to hit a nerve with some people, which in some cases, these projects were considered to be too ahead of their time. Thus, through a number of complications have led them to be retracted in certain territories. Then there are other movies, where they were created to have the tone and feel of something much more darker, but during development the direction was changed to make them slightly less impactful, or they never made it incredibly far during development. So while these darker flicks are incomplete, they are still fascinating to look into. So in today's programme, we're going to be taking a look at 20 banned or lost creepy dark movies. Now, some of these films may be heavier than others, so viewer discretion is very much advised. Also, if this kind of content sounds like your type of cup of tea and you want to see more like it, then all by means feel free to subscribe, as it would be very much appreciated, joining me along the journey of covering more lost and obscure media. And if there are any other movies that you felt like that should have been on the list, then please let me know down in the comment section down below. I would love to hear all of your suggestions. Okie dokie, with the context out of the way, let's begin our programme. It was in March of 1982 that the first test screening went underway for the movie The Dark Crystal. In the first cut, the Skeksis spoke in a completely made-up language, and there was no narrator to relay the context of the world. The main director, Jim Henson, had hoped that the sophistication of the puppets was so advanced that the audience would be able to piece together the story on their own. However, he was mortified to see that in the test screening, the children were constantly asking the parents as to what was going on, with the grown-ups not having a clue themselves. It was because of that circumstance, and the new producers didn't have much faith into the movie. Henson had purchased back the film and retweaked it so it would be slightly easier for the general public to follow the plot. While the film did moderately healthy at the box office, it proved to be more popular in home media, and has garnered itself a cult following. For decades, the only way to experience the original cut of The Dark Crystal was via some small clips, seen in the making of featurette in the build-up to the original release. But at some point in the 2000s, the work print of The Dark Crystal had been leaked online. It's far from desirable quality, but at the moment it's the closest copy we have of the director's cut to The Dark Crystal. In the year of 1996, a slightly different version was being created of Shrek. A little bit darker perhaps, more dramatic, maybe, but generally more adventurous than the final film we got, which played up the comedy aspect. Although two of the main reasons as to why we never got to see this rendition of Shrek was that Katzenberg wasn't very fond of this version, but the biggest reason was the unforeseen passing of Chris Farley, who was slated to play Shrek. So the movie was completely reworked to fit a different celebrity instead, Mike Myers. DreamWorks has virtually released nothing at all from this original version of Shrek in an official capacity. What the public has seen from this version of Shrek has been solely reliant on third parties, such as animators show reels and demo reels to see snippets of the original test version of Shrek. As well, in the script trading community, they've been trying to track down and see if they can find any early drafts to Shrek that would have been related to Chris Farley. Some rare scripts are usually restricted to only being in very small circles, so while it does make it difficult to ascertain the full narrative as to what's available out there, from what we do understand, 13 drafts were written before Chris Farley had passed away, and that we know that a second draft of Shrek was sold at an auction many years ago, but whoever does have it has not come forward as of yet. Released in Paris at the end of 1975 was 120 Days of Sodom, based on the 1904 book with the same name, which was written 219 years before its publication. The story follows 4 Libradine men who have a thirst of dire sexual gratification and go about it in the most deprived way possible. There's a lot of mystique with the original story, as the writer never completed it to his original intention. When the book was adapted for the Italian movie, it was slightly revised, being set 30 years prior in World War II. While not a faithful adaptation, it did not visually shy away from the obscene acts that the kidnapped teenagers are put through. This movie seemed fated to be cursed, as it was sadly the final movie for Mr. Pasolini, as he was murdered 3 weeks prior to the movie's release. The movie got banned in Canada, Britain, and its country of origin, Italy, although it did prosper in the US market. Released on Boxing Day in US cinemas in 1973 was The Exorcist, based on the novel released 2 years prior, about a young girl being possessed by a demon. Unsurprisingly, giving its sacrilegious betrayal, the response was very mixed amongst religious groups. It did receive an uncut theatrical release when it came to Britain, although due to certain pressure groups it was unofficially banned in some parts of the country. It eventually received a home media release in Britain, although when it became mandatory that all home media releases needed to have an A certificate on them when it was submitted to the BBFC for classification, they, for a short while, declined to give it a certificate for home media, as it was feared that the young girl Regan, who was 12 in the film, could attract minors to watch the movie, and unlike a cinema setting where you can more easily regulate the people that go in to see a movie, you haven't exactly got that same control on a VHS release. So while it was declined to be released on home media, it still played in cinemas. It wouldn't be until its 25th anniversary that it was finally blessed with an A certificate for home media in Britain, finally giving it a life beyond cinemas in the country. Despite producing The Land Before Time, Spielberg and Lucas were scarcely involved with the production, only having an opportunity to truly consult on the movie when it was drastically finishing up production. From 6 months to mere weeks of its release, they demanded drastic cuts to already fully completed animated sequences. The removed content were scenes that they deemed to be too scary for kids. At the time, they were both dads to very small children, so this may have been a contributing factor to their decisions. Doing edits on an animated film like this is typically unusual, and Bluth wasn't very flattered over the last minute cuts at the time, but on reflection felt that the edits contributed into making the film a superior cut. Although where the original prints are to the supposedly darker version of the movie is not entirely known. From interviews with individuals who had worked on the movie, they don't recall backing up the deleted content, which is not the most reassuring news for preservation. But it's still a product from the late 80s, so there's a fair increased chance that a copy may still very well exist. Maybe a good hunt through the Universal Archive can reveal results. Initially, Small Soldiers, which was a kind of combination between Toy Story and Gremlins, was meant to be an edgy R-rated picture for teenagers, but once the studio began enlisting sponsorships, they requested from the director Joe Dante to tone down the movie to a family picture. Although already fully substantially filming the movie, he was only able to edit it down so much to be a PG-13. Reportedly, Burger King were not ever so flattered, but it did receive a PG rating for when it came to the UK, although when it was released the movie was not a great success, with the action figures failing to flourish off the toy shelves. Although 20 plus years on and after gaining a cult following, mint in box, the toys are now a popular collector's item. Fragments of deleted scenes have been made available via the home media release, but as for the cut content that would have made it an R-rated flick, have still remained hidden. The 1988 movie The Last Temptation of Christ was based on the 1955 novel of the same name. depicting the life of Jesus confronted with a number of different temptations, such as crisis anxiety and depression, and his fantasy of sexual lust. The last one in particular upset a lot of religious organisations. Both the book and the film have been very controversial over the years. When the movie was released to home media, many video rental stores cautiously passed on the title. This included major companies like Blockbuster. The 1985 animated movie The Black Cauldron was certainly a very different film when compared to other animated Disney films released prior, as it had more of a bolder, darker and adventurous tone. When Katzenberg was brought in quite late into the production to oversee the project, where the animation process was more or less pretty much complete. Coming from the world of live-action filmmaking, he demanded that they go into the edit suite and edit out the more intense moments. The crew were not entirely happy by this, as such edits would only take place during the assembly process. Michael Eisner was able to be the intermissioner between both parties, but Katzenberg still got his own way with about 10 to 12 minutes being removed out. To date, none of the deleted scenes have ever been fully and publicly released, although Yesterworld was able to get their hands on the original master storyboards of the film, and broke down as to what the original deleted scenes were. This will be the closest we'll get to experience the original version of the Black Cauldron until the day that Disney deems it to be worthy to be released to the public. Disney's 2000 CGI movie Dinosaur began as a Phil Tippett stop-motion project in the late 80s, where it would have been about a herd of Styracosaurs, accompanied with a small mammal named Surrey, who would be the only character retained left in the 2000s movie. Unlike those in the final movie, none of the animals would have talked. The finale of the film would have seen the lead Styracosaur fighting against a T-Rex. While the horned dinosaur did come out on top, the confrontation would have happened right at the asteroid impact that wiped out the dinosaurs, just leaving the tiny mammals as the only survivors in this barren wasteland. So in other words, the dinosaurs didn't get the Hollywood ending. When the pitch came and was sold to Disney in the early 90s, there was a lot of back and forth stipulation on the budget. Phil Tippett wanted more, but Jeffrey Katzenberg wanted less. Phil Tippett had left the project when it was suggested to make the dinosaurs talk and sing. The Dinosaur movie went through drastic changes throughout the rest of the decade, even going back and forth if the dinosaurs should speak. There were many different versions of the story. Some got further along than others, and while they would be within a rough state, they're likely semi-watchable via storyboard and test animatics, being drastically more darker than what we ended up with. 1971 The Devils, based on 17th century France eyewitness accounts of an alleged demonic depression, divulge into themes which mainly centre around corrupt faith. While making many psychological and political statements, the film is more broadly known on its sexual theme imagery. In fact, it's because of the obscene nudity seen in the movie that it's run into many distribution problems, being outright banned in many territories, and having severe cuts. The UK release ran for about 111 minutes, where the US one was cut down to 108 minutes. Companies such as the Criterion Collection and the BFI have tried desperately hard for years to release a director's cut, but Warner Brothers, who currently have copyright over the movie, have refused to do so, with the special edition home media releases being somewhat compromised by them. A notable deleted scene that's rather rare to come by has been given the nickname the Jesus rape scene. Now, by YouTube's policy, I can't exactly show it without risking my video to be demonetized, but from what I can relay, it certainly was very daring imagery of the time, and I imagine reserved people like my mum would be a little bit red if they saw it. But also the scene borders on a live action parody of a South Park sketch. Just take my word on that one. With the immense success of the original Jaws movie, Universal Studios were immensely keen to get a follow-up on the way, and one very unique proposal was not so much of a Jaws follow-up, but a prequel instead, where it would have focused on Quint as a young man, set back in World War II, where after surviving the sinking of the USS Indianapolis, would have to return back to civilization in shark-infested waters, essentially visually showing the story that he told on the boat in the original movie, although the concept was scrapped after the executives decided that audiences would generally prefer seeing a continuation with the Brody family. However, this wouldn't be the last time that a Jaws prequel was in the works. 2015 proved to be a fated year for both Back to the Future and the Jaws series, as in October of that year, scriptwriter Will Dunn had wrote that Jaws prequel titled The Fisherman. The plot would have been about a fisherman sailing out to sea acting on revenge, tracking down the shark that killed him and his men after they were shipwrecked at sea during World War II. The plot does line up with the story that Quint relayed on the boat. The fisherman character may very well be Quint himself, although unfortunately the short summary I have doesn't clarify this. To date, both the 2015 and 70s prequel scripts have yet to re-emerge online. Made all the way back in 1964 as part of the UCLA Animation Workshop, there was a most unique student film titled Uncle Walt. The film is a dark parody on the Disney franchise. The most extreme scenes feature the female centaurs from Fantasia working in the red light district with Goofy as their pimp, the Queen from Snow White transforming into a hag, and the seven dwarfs worshipping Mickey in a Colosseum-like setting. From what is publicly understood, the short film was only screened once at the 1972 American Film Institute as part of 50 years of American animation. The creator of this most unique film was Robert Swarth, who might very well be the only person to have a copy of the film.
I actually tried writing him like a handwritten letter years ago, but it got returned to me for some reason. Like it couldn't be delivered. I actually did manage to communicate with him once on an old blog post I found about one of his films, where he had left a comment. I told him about wanting to see Uncle Walt. He asked me to drop my phone number in the comments, which I did, but then he never called. And that's as far as I ever got with that one.
To date, neither a second or frame of the movie has ever reappeared for the public to see. In 1993, it had been 4 years since the last Doctor Who episode was produced, with that year corresponding with the 30th anniversary of the programme. BBC Enterprises, who mainly worked on the BBC home media video range, had plans to create a feature-length Doctor Who special, where the main lead would have been the fourth incarnation of the Doctor, Tom Baker, where an outside source causes a deviation within his timeline that the Tom Baker Doctor never regenerated, which causes an alternate reality where humanity is on the brink of extinction. It's up to the fourth Doctor, recurring Doctor Who support character Brigadier, and companion Ace to put things right, with the other surviving Doctor Who actors acting as supporting roles, all the meanwhile facing against some of the most iconic Doctor Who monsters in the show's history. The film was going to be grand, big, epic, extremely dark, and no doubt extremely convoluted, especially to viewers who may not be familiar with Doctor Who's lore, to put it nicely. The project may have been a little bit too much to realistically be put together. For one thing, while Tom Baker was extremely keen to return back to Doctor Who, the other surviving Doctor Who actors were not very flattered on how small their roles were. Furthermore, they weren't even given the scripts via the proper channels. Not the most professional way to get your main stars on board. Years later, Sylvester McCoy commented on the script, saying that it probably wouldn't have been the storyline that Doctor Who fans would have really wanted to see. Only very shortly after being publicly announced, it was decided to cancel the project, after they realised that the budget they had was just not going to be a realistic project to achieve. But it might not necessarily be the end for the Dark Dimension just yet. Doctor Who has been a notoriously famous franchise for resurrecting many pieces of its missing media. either completely reanimating missing episodes from the main series, or readapting cancelled episode scripts to be in an audio format. It's not a question if the Dark Dimension will ever be resurrected, but merely just when it will. There would be a 14-year hiatus between Jurassic Park 3 and Jurassic World. Between that time, there was various ideas of what to do for the fourth follow-up. One very disturbing idea for a plot would have featured human DNA spliced with dinosaurs. Now, certainly the franchise is not unfamiliar with the concepts of sci-fi and horror, but coming off the heels of survival adventure movies that dealt with the question of science dabbling too much in the role of God, to suddenly go straight to, well, this was certainly a very bold idea. When the pitch came to Ambient, the idea was shot down immediately. Several bits and pieces of the concept art has found its way online, but the full script has still not seen the light of day. Engagi was a fictionalized documentary about Africa, sensationalizing many of the animals and people of the continent, although the extent of the fabricating facts went to demoralizing the Africans in the film, outright calling them simple-minded and implying that they may be crossbreeding with the apes as well. While at the box office the film was immensely successful, it got into a lot of controversy for not only number 1 making up many of the facts, but also copyright issues such as borrowing footage that they didn't gain permission to use. Eventually, the film was pulled from distribution. For decades, the film was presumed to be long lost, with only the audio from the movie and photographs resurfacing online. It wouldn't be until by the late 2010s that the film was even confirmed to even still be within existence, held by the Library of Congress. And then it wouldn't be until the early 2020s that the film finally got a home media release, on Blu-ray by Something Weird Video. The movie is certainly a fascinating time capsule, as there was nothing else quite like it of its time. Although with the racist remarks and the archival footage of real animal killings, it's certainly not a film for everybody. It was only mere weeks after the release of E.T. that Universal was clamoring to Spielberg to do a follow-up film. So a beat sheet draft was written up, essentially being a story outline of the main plot beats of the narrative. It would have featured Elliot and his siblings being abducted by aliens with devious intentions, trying to use Elliot as a way to find E.T. directly. Eventually, by the end of the film, E.T. would have turned up and saved the kids. The semi-draft is available to read up online, and it's certainly a very drastic change from the original. Gone is the whimsy, humble and down-to-earth feel, instead turning the E.T. franchise into something a little bit bolder and bigger. Spielberg eventually concluded that the original film didn't exactly lend itself to a sequel, and after reading the leaked draft script, I think I agree with him. I don't think this would have been the E.T. sequel that people would have really wanted. If you really want to see an E.T. sequel, then I would recommend checking out the Sky Christmas advert. It's short and sweet and sticks quite closely to the feel and plot beats of the original film, and only being about 4 minutes long, it doesn't overstay its welcome, which I think would be the ultimate risk if this advert was feature length. Woman in Cell Block 9 is a horror exploitation movie about 6 ladies who are in prison within the middle of a South American jungle. Stripped of their clothing, they're obscenely tortured. The movie has been very infamous in the UK. This is because one of the women actress of the film, Susan Hemingway, was only 16 at the time of filming, and given that she was involved with some of the more obscene sequences, by UK law, it would make it a product of indecent imagery. So it's because of this fact that the movie has never been unbanned in the UK, and it looks like it will never will, unless if you could somehow remove the character altogether. In 1970, Amanda Fielding took it upon herself to do a self-operation of Trapination. The practice involves making a hole in your skull, a practice that modern medical research would be highly against, as there's nothing to really benefit from it. In fact, it may lead to more harmful complications. When Amanda took on this fairly risky operation, she had a documentary crew to film it for her. This would be formatted into the documentary Heartbeat in the Brain, while clips from the film would later be repurposed for other documentaries. The full movie is not publicly accessible to view, and Amanda certainly doesn't have any intentions to widely distribute it.
Just that I'm absolutely not in favour of self-trepination. It's absolutely not a thing for lay people to do.
Nabil Shaban is a British writer and actor. He's got brittle bones disease, meaning that he's a dwarf that is confined to his wheelchair. Despite this handicap, he has still had a healthy career in his own right, setting up his own disabled theatre company. He has had a number of film and TV appearances, but his best known role was playing the alien slimy Syl in Doctor Who.
That is enterprising.
In 1996, he created a script called The First to Go, being set in Nazi Germany, being about the gas chambers, where their original purpose was to kill off the disabled people of Germany. Nabil was additionally commissioned to create a screenplay adaptation of his script, and producers of the BFI were very interested into adapting the script, although the film itself never came to fruition, as according to Nabil, the producers wanted to cast big stars in the disabled roles, which Nabil saw it disgraceful seeing an able-bodied person playing a handicapped individual, in his word being the equivalent of blackface. In 2008, the First to Go script finally made it as a stage show drama, which you can see a recording of online. Oh, and I also found out that Nabil is active on YouTube. His content is certainly interesting, I'll say that much. And here we come to our final entry, Jerry Lewis, The Day the Clown Cried, intended to be a vehicle and a passion project for Jerry. The plot follows a washed-up clown actor named Helmut Dort, where his best days are more or less behind him. He soon gets fired from the circus that he'd been working at for years. Heading off to the local pub to drown his sorrows, he drunkenly mocks Hitler and heavily criticises the recent politics of Germany. This leads him to be arrested and sent to a Nazi concentration camp. There he comes across a group of Jewish children, where he spends his time at the camp entertaining and amusing them. Through the persuasion of the guards, they convince him to load up the children onto a train. After a series of circumstances, Helmut ends up travelling alongside the children. The movie comes on to its climax where the man leads the children into the gas chambers. All the meanwhile, he prays for a miracle and would rather remain with the children in their final moments. Sadly, that miracle doesn't come. This very well may be one of the earliest Hollywood movies to deal with the topic of the Nazi Holocaust. Filmed in 1971, only really a little over a generation after those events. Saying that the topic would have hit a nerve at the time would be truly an understatement. Given the context, it certainly would have been a very heavy movie to balance. Overall, the movie didn't end up getting released. That was because the producers didn't actually officially acquire the film rights to make it. And O'Brien, who held on to the copyright of the story, didn't approve upon the deviations that they did of the plot. That and the main lead actor Jerry Lewis falling out with the other producer Nathan caused the film to be stuck within a semi-limbo. Over the years, rough cuts have been shown at private screenings, and later reports made of people who saw it only heighten the public's curiosity of the final product, with only a script that resurfaced online as the only full way to experience the story in some capacity. In 2015, Jerry Lewis had donated the assets he had for the film to the Library of Congress, and gave them the condition of not to publicly release anything not until about a decade afterwards, so we should hopefully see the material sometime after 2024. But this will be an incomplete version of the final movie, and reportedly the print isn't within the best state, with the audio of the film being rather inconsistent, and additionally much of the material may only comprise of behind the scenes footage. In any case, if the day ever does come where we see the full-length movie, going by the sporadic reviews over the years, we can say for certain that the movie will indeed be very divided.